Hi, everybody. I hope everyone is doing great. We are going to do in this tutorial a weather dashboard. So we are going to utilize the full size of our window with 3 different panels, and each panel is going to give us the weather conditions for each particular city that we are going to select. The motivation for this project was that I was considering doing this dashboard to check the weather for mainly 3 cities that I'm interested at the moment in: Shanghai, New York, and Athens. And I was considering, yeah, we could have like this interface to be able to see the weather and to utilize P5 to develop this little project. And the second motivation was that there are a lot of little details hidden in this project that I believe if we put them all together, they're going to help you in understanding better how to develop the composition of your own projects. So I'm hoping that the techniques we are going to see here, they're going to be useful to you. And yeah, let's get started. So you see here we have the project, and this project contains a couple of assets that includes the fonts that I'm using. Icons, I'm using some icons for my weather dashboard, and the index file and the sketch.js. Some very simple example at the moment. If we go live, we're gonna see that this is the page, something really simple. What we have here is like a page that we can resize, and we can see that the shape that we have in the middle, it will resize accordingly. We are using the window width and window height, and we're making sure that when we resize the window, the canvas will change. So this is the basic introduction of the project from where we're going to start. So this is going to be one panel, another panel in the middle, and then the other one on the side. I can straight away come here and add these little different panels. For the X position here, I'm gonna say width divided by 3. This is the size of the panel that I want. And this one, if I multiply it with 2, it's gonna give me the other panel as well. Okay, 3 panels, it will be resizable, although my main focus has been just to use it as a full screen, as we see here. So 3 different cities, the weather of the conditions will appear here. For this, I am using the OpenWeatherMap API. Sorry, this is the link. And from the OpenWeatherMap, if we open the main page here, we will see that we are able to devise any kind of weather dashboards, or like any way that we would like to use weather information from different locations, different cities, and also get like forecast of data, and all of this information is accessible to us from the Open API that the project is using. So an application programming interface that collects data and then shares the data with other users, which is the weather data. And in more particular, we're going to use the current weather API of the specific cities that we are interested. And the current weather is not actually real time, but it's like the most recent reading of the weather conditions that exist on a location. We're going to see this in a little bit. And now, if we search for a weather dashboard, we will see like there are ways that we can visualize weather information on our display. And I'm using some similar strategies in this project I'll share with you. So you'll see here different fonts, some icons that we are using, and I have already downloaded them and use them in my assets. Here on my assets, I have downloaded the Open Sans styles from this family. If you remember, if we go to the Google, fonts.google, we will be able to search for a particular font and then download this into our system, or even like use the direct link to them. I have used a few from here, like the light italic, the regular, and the bold. Yeah, so this 4, I believe so. Yeah, 4 different fonts. I've downloaded them. I include them into my assets already. And I have downloaded some icons as SVG file type. There are many ways that you can download icons, free and open source. You can use them in your project. And the idea here is that if there is, let's say, a rain or sun or a snow for a particular city that will be selecting a new icon, it's going to give us this information too. Yeah, that's it for the introduction. So let's get started. We already have this little template that we see here, right? Like how these 3 panels appear. On my HTML, I don't include any particular complicated content. Here I include the P5 and the DOM libraries. I have downloaded them and include them here in this folder in the libraries directory. And I use a sketch.js, which is the sketch I have at the moment here. And that's it. No CSS, just like this command for the padding and the margin that I'm going to use it as 0. So basically nothing in terms of CSS, but I want to focus on many, many different other things related to the compositional strategies that we use for developing a particular project. So yeah, let's get started. Okay, so here we have loaded the fonts into these variables. The fonts, as I said, they exist in this directory: assets, Open Sans, light italic, regular, and bold. And the icons, 6 different icons that I have in the icons folder. And in order for them to load them, I use a for loop, an image array. For each position of the array, a new image is going to be loaded. We're using the load image function. And from the directory here, I concatenate the I, which is the number of the loop index, and the +1 because our icons start from 1, and this starts from 0. So it has to be +1. So here we have loaded these icons and fonts. We don't need to use the preload function anymore. So I will close this part to make more space for the other things to come. The next step would be that we would like to include a selector, a way that we can define which specific city is going to be displayed in one part, in one panel, and which other city is going to be displayed on another. If we go to the reference here on P5 and we write select, create select, right? So the create select is a DOM object that gives us this little box. And if we click it, we have different options. There's a pear, kiwi, grape, whatever. Sorry. So we will use the same way to create 3 different of these selectors and add them into each one of the panels. Here you see that we have a variable that is assigned the create select function. The position is the position of the element, and the options, we can have as many options as we want. And this triggers a function. If this is changed, it will trigger an event such as my select event. And in this case, it will draw a little text beneath that. So let's go ahead and create the selectors. Okay, what did we do now? We created this 3 different selectors, defining the variables at the beginning, and then created a new function to somehow group these settings here all together. For the city selector 1, we created options for 4 cities. We can, of course, extend it, but for now I have included just these 4. The first one is positioned at 1010. The second one is going to position at window width divided by 3 plus 10, right? 10 is the offset, and this one is going to be 2 multiplied window width divided by 3 plus 10. This is the position, 3 different positions that they have to align with where the frame of the panel is. And each one of them, every time we will select, we will use these selectors, a new function is going to be triggered. For the first selector, we will have the city select event 1. It's going to trigger at the moment in the console a message of 1. Then we have selector number 2 and 3. If I save this and go back to our window, here we see the selectors, right? And the positions at the moment, if I move them around, they're going to be all over the place, but we are going to fix it very, very soon. Okay, let's refresh the page. For now, the original position looks fine. So if I press this, it's going to tell me 1, which means the first selector has triggered 1 event from here, right? Then if I trigger this one, 2, and 3, right? 3 corresponding functions, and each one of them can trigger a different call to the API as we're going to develop later on. In order to fix the resized method, we need to come here at the very end, and we need to remove the selectors and then run the setup selectors once again. Looks, it's working now. Okay, so now if I resize it, the selectors, they remain in place. At this point, I think it's a good idea to go and check about the OpenWeatherMap. So the OpenWeatherMap has this API page and the current weather data. This is what we are using, but you'll see that there are some additional APIs available for a forecast, for 16 days, climatic forecast, solar radiation. All of these are different APIs. And if you go to their documentation, you will see how you can use them and how you can make calls to the API and extract information that you can use for visualization and other purposes. So here, if we go to this API document, we will see that the call, the API call, it's using this kind of syntax of a URL. So in this URL, by changing, in this case, the latitude and the longitude, and adding the API key, you will be able to get the weather data for this position. Now, the API key is a special key that it is given to each user. After you sign up, you can collect your API key, which is a code. In my case, I may have it here, right? And I can copy it to my project, and now I can use it into my example, right? So I definitely need this, the API key. And the other thing about the location, certainly this is one way to ask for the weather on that geographical location, but we can also utilize the query mode, like we can ask in which city we would like to get the weather information from. And we're going to go with the second option. We're going to use the query option. And I'm gonna also go and get this long URL that we need to design very shortly, right? So here, if we utilize, this is the URL that we need to design, right? Here, let's say if we want to ask for Shanghai and use this API key, which is this number, with using this call, we will be able to get the weather for Shanghai using the metric system and using this API key. Now, if I use this link on my web browser, I can immediately see that I'm getting this text, and this text includes some information such as weather description, clear, yeah, clear sky, temperature is close to 20 degrees, and some other information. And of course, we can see that the name of the city is Shanghai. So we were able to get this information successfully. If we change here the name of the city to London and press the query again, we will get another text object, text return, that it is for London and the weather is a little different, okay? So this is basically how this API works. We utilize this as a special call. We need to structure this link specifically, and in turn, we will get some text. That's all it is. And this text, it returns as a JavaScript object. This is a great explanation about JSON. So JSON, it is a JavaScript. It stands for JavaScript Object Notation. So it is basically a way that we store and exchange data between computers, servers, clients, databases, and so on. So if, for example, we would like to have a system where it stores our employees' data, we can have an employees defined in this structure as we see it. In this case, this employees is an array that has 3 entries. Each entry is separated by this comma, and within that entry we have this JSON description that it is about a pair between the name and the value, and this is separated by this dots, right? Then we have the comma and another element with this within this particular location. And if you notice, like this return that we already got is exactly the same, right? It's using these curly brackets. It is using like sometimes some arrays. It is using the structure of the name and the value, right? The name, the value, the name, and the value, and so on. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to use our selectors, the ones that we design now. So if I select Athens, I will be able to change this URL, right? And instead, let's say of London, it says Athens and executes the command, and we get as a return in P5 this information that we're going to use for the visualization. So what I need to do is I need to come into the city event functions here, and I need to create a variable about my location, and the location is going to be assigned by the city. So selector one.value. This value from the first object, right? If I select Athens or New York or London, it's going to be stored now in this variable that it's called loc for location. Then the URL that I need to construct is going to be similar to this, the one I just used on my browser. So the URL is going to be within brackets, right? Here I can say equals plus API key, right? I concatenate the content that it is included in the API key, which is this number. It's exactly the same as before. And here I need to split this. So I need to make these two messages, which I'm going to concatenate. And inside here, I'm going to use lock the location. So the final message is going to look exactly like this. Okay, and this is like what it's going to be executed. Shanghai or any other city is going to be replaced by the location, this variable that it extracts information from the selector, right? And I concatenate all of this, which means that it's gonna design a new structure every time I select a different event. Okay. And the final thing that I have to do now is I need to use the loadJSON object, and I'm going to use the URL, and I'm going to use a callback function that I'm going to call weather callback. And this weather callback, it's going to be a new function I create here, which is going to give me the weather data, which is a variable. And if I use my console here to see what this variable contains, it's going to be this weather data similar to the ones we saw on my browser just before. The loadJSON function, I go to the reference. The loadJSON function is a function that will allow us to use a URL and read the JSON that it is within that response. Here there is another example that uses a different API, which is about earthquakes. So similarly to what we are doing, if you use this API, it will return to you the JSON object that it contains the information about the earthquakes. And this is the other way to get the data using a callback function. And this callback function is asking for another function, and when the JSON object has finished loading, when we were able to extract the data, then the new function we created is going to return the data through this name, through this variable that it is within its parentheses. And then this earthquakes is going to give us all of the JSON content. So right now, our function is complete, but I need to repeat it for the selector number 2 and selector number 3. So these are going to be executed when there is a selection on the buttons, and all of them, they will be using the same callback function, and all of the results will appear here. So let's test it out. Let's save this and come back and try out. If I select Athens, here you will see on my console that I'm able to see all of this information that I saw before on my browser. And this is about Athens and the weather conditions within that. Here you see this structure makes it easier for us to see what is the content of the JSON object. And there is information such as the wind, the weather conditions, sunrise and sunset, temperature, location, current time, and so on. So all of this information now, it becomes available to us to use it in our sketch. If I select another city, here I can see there is another response about New York or London and now the response, right? So each one of these, they have a different response that is given back to us. All of the data are contained within this weather data object, and we need to extract them. Let me open my inspect once, the window of my console once again, and call, let's say, Athens, New York. Okay, so let's pay attention to this structure. We need to extract from this structure the corresponding messages that we will use for our visualization. Here, we need to define the variables, the properties that we want to extract from our object. So the ones that I'm going to use, I need to come here and define the variables, variable names. Right, so this is what I want to get, this information, and how can I go and grab the data from here? The JSON object is using the dot notation to be able to access properties within a specific structure, similar to the way that a class instance, we may call a class in the function of a class instance by using the class instance name, dot notation, and then the name of the function, and we are able to execute the specific function of that class. Similarly to that, if we come here and we want to get the city, we need to see where the city is included. And the city is included into the name, right? The name here is the name, and the value is New York. So this is on the first, let's say, level of the hierarchy, right? The name, the ID, DT, COD, base, all of these are on, and of course the clouds and the main and so on. They are on the first level of the hierarchy, although this, the main, for example, that has this little arrow, it contains some additional information inside, and some of them, they contain also arrays. So we can see that this weather is actually an array with one element. That's how we can read it. So in order to go and grab the city name, we just need to assign this to get city by saying weather data dot name, and that's it. For the description, it is included within weather, which is an array, and it has only one element on the 0 position. And from that, we want to access the main, right? That says basically what is the description of the weather at the moment. It's like misty, right? So this description, we're going to use again the same weather data, and then dot weather 0. This is the position we are looking at, and main. The temperature is at this other main, and temperature and humidity. So no array here, dot main dot temp, yep, and humidity, same thing as this one, and here we enter humidity, and the wind speed is weather dot data dot wind dot speed, because it is included. Wind is the first, and then speed is the second element that we want to access. Now, if I come to the console and let's say I print the city and I print the description, yeah, this two would be enough. What I will be able to get if I save this is Athens clouds, New York mist, London clouds, Shanghai clear, right? So now I am able to get this data to these variables, and I'm going to use these variables to initialize the objects that I am going to construct, and then later on display their values on the dashboard. Yeah. Now, I will do one additional step here because I want to know that when I press this selector, the first instance of the class is going to run, and this is going to visualize on this area, only on this area. And then the second one, I'm going to include it here, and the third one here. So this is more or less hard-coded, the responses that I want to get, and this is basically the main, let's say, vision of this project. That's the main idea. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to create another variable that it's going to call let selector equals to 0. Let's say selector value. We need to know which selector has been selected, right? So this selector value, I'm going to say here, if I press the first button, it's going to be number 1 or number 2 or number 3. And then when I come to this point, I will say if selector value equals to 1, what's going to happen is create instance 1. So we need to create a new instance using a new class that we're going to design, and this is going to give us the first object that is going to be displayed, or the second object that's going to be displayed, or the third object. So 2, 2, and 3, right? Cool. So this is what's going to happen. We create a new instances. So these new instances, they're going to be called, I'm going to put them on a array. OBJs equals, sorry. Yeah. So here, create instance 1, 0 equals, and then this one is instance 2 and instance 3. For now, these are empty, right? Nothing exists here. We don't have a class yet. But what we want to do is we want to assign this to a new weather class. And this weather class here, we're going to initialize some content. The content would be position X and Y. So we already know that the position X for object 0 is 0. It starts from the very first pixel of our canvas, and the Y is going to be 0. The next bit is going to be the size, and the size we already know that it's going to be window width divided by 3. That's the size. And the next thing is going to be, we need to know the city we are working with. We need to know the description of the weather, the temperature, humidity, and wind speed, right? All of this information, we pass it to the constructor, and then within the class, we're going to design something out of that information. Yeah. And I think that's fine. I will come here and create the second object and the third. The only thing that I would change is basically the position. So this one will start at position window width divided by 3, and this is going to start at window position divided by 3, but multiplied by 2. And the rest is going to be fine, right? I save this. For now, nothing's going to happen, certainly, because we haven't designed the class. So let's come back here and design the class. Okay, so now we created the constructor for the XY, the size of the window, the location, which is basically the city, description of the weather, temperature, humidity, wind speed. This is the information we get. And now we created the classes variables, right? So all of these, they need to be initialized at this position, correct? And then this is going to give us the separate instances that they have like different properties, most likely. Most likely, I think only the size basically is different. The others can be same if the location that has been selected is the same location, such as like New York, it has been selected in both of them, right? Okay, so we have the constructor, and I'm going to add an update function that is going to tell us certain information. And here we are going to create the visualization that will appear here on our window. And we are going to use the location. We're going to use the location here as a text description, the description, the temperature, humidity, and wind speed. We can go ahead and write the content for this text. So I'm going to type it down. Please have a look, and I'll give an explanation after each part. Okay, so here about the location, what it happens is I have included a text font for the location. I would like to be like the bold font that I added in the beginning. Color of white, no stroke, it's going to align to the left. The text size here, I define it as 100 and I multiply it with a certain value, and this is going to help me to resize uniformly as I change the browser window. We're going to see the response very, very soon. And for the text, I'm getting that this dot location and this information is passed into my constructor by the from the initialization, right? When we initialize the object. So this location is basically the get city property, and this get city is being constructed, is being initialized every time the weather callback returns a message from the API, and every time we use the selectors to select a value and then pass it on to the callback function, then initialize the properties, and then the constructor grab that location and passes it along to the text that is going to give us the display of the location that we selected. In order to see the content, we need to run the update function on the draw loop. Let's see if it's going to work. Okay, it works. Now, this information that we see is actually coming from the API. It doesn't come directly from this object, right? Which means that everything works fine. Now, you see what I said to you before about the text size. You'll see that if I resize the window, the text also kind of tries to resize as well, so it doesn't go all over the place. And this is achieved by multiplying the size to the window width divided by 2,400. This is a value that I checked if it works for me, and it works for me, and then I made sure that I use it. And I do the same for the positioning of the text. I make sure that I get that this .x, which is basically the x value of this particular object. That's why for 0, it will appear only here and not here, right? and then I add a specific offset that, again, this offset is dynamic. As I change my window, it will change this property, it will add to this, and I'm able to have this kind of behavior. And I do the same for the positioning, the other positioning variables. So I will continue now with the description, the temperature, humidity, and wind speed. Okay, so this is how my code looks at the moment. I have repeated exactly the same step as here. For the description, I'm using a different font. I use the light font here. Actually, let's run it one by one so that we can see these minor differences. Yeah, so for the description, different font, I do the same thing as before. I have a smaller size for my text, and I divide it with the same property to have it uniformly. Now, in this case, the text that I'm using is coming from the this.description, right? And again, this.description is the value that I will receive when I initialize my object from the get description, which is the weather data, weather main. Okay, if it is clear weather or whatever, snowy and so on. So now if I save this and go back here and select a city, you will see that now I'm able to have that. In Athens, there are clouds. New York, there are clouds. London, clouds. Shanghai, clear, right? So all of these cities are cloudy, and in Shanghai, we have a clear weather. And you will see the difference in the font, right? This is the bold one, this is the light one, and I think it works better in terms of a composition. And I continue with the temperature, the same process. I'm just repeating how I would like to have this aligned. Here, I want this to put it on the right, put some light font, position it, have a specific size as well, bigger one than the other ones. And here I'm extracting this .temp, which again, same thing, comes from the constructor. And I have different positioning variables for this. Here, I use the parse int to make sure that the temperature that we will get, it's not going to use like a floating point value, and it's going to be only a number. And again, save this and run it, and we are going to get into the temperature now. Okay, so now we are also having the temperature. And finally, the humidity. For the humidity, I'm using two objects, one for the description of the humidity and one for the value that I extract from my constructor. And the same thing with wind speed. I repeat exactly the same. Okay, so here, what we're gonna get is this. Right, so our interface starts taking shape. Here you will notice that we don't have content for these other objects. Then this is because I haven't utilized the I here. I feel these are gonna work fine. Okay, so there is an issue here because the objects haven't initialized yet. I may need to initialize them by coming to the setup and use, let's say, initialize. Let's make, how to say, let's make a new function that is going to initialize the weather objects. Okay, so here in this initialize weather objects, we are assigning the same thing as before, but we need to ensure that there is content, or at least some preset content on this variable. So here the get city, it's gonna get a preset value. The description is gonna get clear. Okay, so now we have two of them. And let's see. Because this needs to be 2 multiplied by this. Yes. Okay. So now we have the preset, let's say the standard view of the content. If I go to Athens, the content will change correspondingly, right? So each one of them is going to go and grab the data and display it for us. All right. So next step now, it would be to utilize the icons. And we are gonna set some certain features on our page to make it a bit more rich. I'm gonna create a new function here that is gonna be called set features. And for these features, let's see what we are gonna do. If this dot description equals to clouds, if this is what we get, then we want to bring to our composition a certain icon, right? From the ones we have here. So in order to get this icon, we need to use a class variable that I'm going to define here. I don't need to pass anything. I just need to check what is this description, which is going to be dynamic as is coming on the input. So this dot icon is going to give us the image that it is coming from position number 0, right? And I can say if this is clear, then the icon that I would like to use is, let me find, it should be on position 3. Right, this image array, again, it is from the icons I have loaded previously. And between these two, we're going to change the icons that they are being displayed. And this one, we are going to do it here on the update function, next to our text and next to the weather description. I'm going to add an image function. Whoops, this should be small. Image function that it is using the selected this dot icon, right? Because we switched, right? And then I'm using the position of the X plus window width. This is the dynamic way. Cool. So now we have set for each particular description, we're going to read a different icon that we assign from our image array. And in order to have the features running, we need to include them into our draw function. Yeah, so, now it's clear. And we see that we have the sun. If we go to Athens, that they're cloudy, we will have the clouds and so on. So on a different weather conditions, we're going to have a different icon that appears here. All right, let's have a time for a little recap. This is what we have achieved so far. The display of the weather conditions in 3 different cities that we can display at the same time. We can add different cities as well from this selector. And here we have like a resizable interface for all the elements. And in terms of our code, what we have from the selectors, we extract the specific city, which triggers this function, and this function is making a call to Weather API. We get a callback from that, and from this function, the weather callback, we extract the weather information that we are interested at. And according to that, we will initialize a different instance of the weather class and display these different properties on each panel of our final window. For the class, we are getting from the constructor all the weather information that we are passing to it. And according to that, we create certain features, text at the moment, and this icon. So a text for the location that uses a different font and a different location, different properties about the description of the weather, and displaying this icon as well, the temperature, humidity, wind, and speed. Wind speed, yeah. So this is what we have at the moment. We have the set features function that checks to see what is going to be the description of the weather, and according to that, we pass along a different icon, different image from the image array to the classes icon that is going to be displayed here on the description. And the next step would be to add some colors. I want to create a gradient function that is having like a darker color at the bottom, and as it goes upwards, it's a little bit brighter. And I want to play with color combinations so that when we have a clear weather, we can somehow have a different color combination than when there is clouds, right? And in order to do that, what I decided to do is using the color adobe. And if you search here on the color adobe and comment, search for, let's say, a clear sky, right? What color combinations we may get. So from the colors that we have here, maybe we can find a certain nice combination, right? I want to have like a darker color, such as this one, and then a lighter at the top, or perhaps it can get a little bit more darker. This needs a little bit of experimentation, right? So need some trial and error and identify what colors work the best for you. But as an example, like I would use something like perhaps this, I would go a little bit darker, but now I have this one, right? So if I come and copy this hexadecimal color representation, I can come and tweak, let's say on the clear weather, this is one color value I'm going to use. And let's say perhaps I'm going to use this one too, right? So this is a darker and this is a lighter. So in order for this to be represented, I need to have definitely two things. The first one is I need to have variables that I'm going to switch through these two different colors. So perhaps I have like this color one, which is equal to this color value, right? And this color two is this other value that I got, the darker one. So now when the description is clear, it's going to give me these two colors. And I'm going to assign them to a gradient function that I will do to represent this transition. these colors definitely also need to be, these variables need to be declared here. If I want, I can give them like an initial value, although I can give them a random value. Let's say, I can give them the same value, whatever, right? Just for this initialization, I can do exactly the same thing I do here. Okay, that's fine. And then later on, as we switch through, this color representations may change. So in going from here to the other bit, that it can be like a different color combination, such as if we now select for the atmospheric, maybe I want to take this color. Actually, let's make a duplication on the atmosphere. Copy this, and then I will change the color representation of color 2, and maybe I can also change the color representation to color 1, right? So on the atmosphere, we will have this color representation, and the clear, and we're going to have this color representation. So I'm going to go ahead and enter the values that I have already selected, and we will continue with the gradient function. Okay, so I'm done entering the color values. You see, for each different description, there is a different color representation. This, I did it again with the Adobe Color website and found some colors that I like, that I feel they match together. For the first color that's going to come on the bottom part, and then it's going to transitioning to the top part, that usually I make it a little bit lighter, or at least there is some contrast between the bottom and the top part. The next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to create another function that is going to call set gradient, right? And this set gradient, I also need to include it here to execute it when it's time. Okay. And for my gradient, I want to create a for loop that it's going to give me one line for 1 pixel across the full height of the screen. So at the bottom, we're going to use the first color, and then we're going to interpolate the color to reach to the second color that we have selected, right? So there is a particular function that we are going to use called lerp call, lerp color, and we are going to implement it by creating this for loop. First, I need to define a no-fill function for what I'm going to draw, and I will create my loop. As my window height, and a step of 1 at each time. This interpolation now is going to map the I value as it cycles through, and it's going to take a value from 0 to window height, right? And I want to map this from a 0 to 1. And so this is going to cycle through, right? For each part of the loop, it's going to give me a transition between 0 and 1. And now I create the color that I want to use, and I will use the lerp color function. The lerp color function, if you have a look at the P5 reference, we are going to find this lerp color, which is using 2 colors, 1 color representation from, and another 2, right? So from one to the other, if we create a transition, it's going to create, let's say, from one color to the other color, it's going to create a transition between these 2, right? And this is going to help us now to do the gradient. So the first color I'm using is this col1, the color variable I have defined. The other color is this col2, and then the transitioning step is the interpolation variable that I use here. Let's make it inter. Okay. And then this is gonna give me a color that I put on my stroke, and I'm using a line that's, using a line that starts from this dot X, the first X position of each instance. It's gonna cycle through all across the eye, and then this will end to this X plus window width divided by 3. This is like the size of each individual screen, right? And then I is gonna be the height, the corresponding height. So this is our function, and it's gonna get, again, the colors that we have created according to these descriptions. And we have an initial color of a clear sky. Let's run it and see what we get. Here we already see the blue, darker blue, lighter blue for the clear selection. Shanghai at the moment is clear, so it's the same color. Athens is clear, New York is clear, London is cloudy, and the color changed to that specific city, right? So you already see that the difference between the color variation, it is getting from a darker position to a lighter position. And this is going to run independently for each panel, for each different city. And it will be responding to the to the weather conditions. The other thing that I would like to extend as a design is to add a kind of a more generative function to make it a bit more engaging to look at. And I have decided to come to the class and create kind of some waves that they're gonna run along each particular window. And I'm gonna set a new function, set waves, make sure that I run this here after my gradient. Dot set waves, right? Now, what we're going to do here, let's create a push and pop function. I'm going to use a translate, so I don't want to disturb the rest of my creations. Right, a push and pop, and inside here I will add a translate for the whole system, the whole visualization that I'm going to use. And I'm going to use this dot X as a starting point and 0. Right, this is going to be the position, the main position. And I'm going to do a for loop, a 2-dimensional for loop that uses a vertex shape, a begin shape and an end shape, and within that a vertex shape. And I'm going to use some noise to kind of like create this wave, let's say, feeling. So I'm going to start with a for loop. Here I need to define a specific number of lines that I want to create. And this number of lines, I will declare it at the top. I will generate a kind of a random function, right? And I will say between, I don't know, 70 to 100. Maybe this I can optimize later on according to the performance of my system. So this is gonna use like 70 to 100 lines that it's gonna use as the wave. Okay, the step for this is gonna be 1. All right, so within here, I am going to, here I'm gonna do the coloring process, let's say. I'm going to talk about it a little bit soon. The next bit is I'm going to start the begin shape at this point, right? And then create another for loop that is going to be responsible for the segments of this wave. X equals window width divided by 3 plus 30. This is a kind of an offset. I can start with that. So it will start from 0, right? The X position, and it will run all across the segment, the panel. And the step is going to be something like 20. And then again, I can optimize depending on the performance of my system. So here I'm going to create the noise function. And after that, I'm going to do the end shape, right? After I do my vertex, how I want my vertex to respond for the X and the Y, right? Where I'm going to position them. This is what I know at the moment. So the next bit is I'm going to create a noise function. I'm going to use a noise function that is using multiplication of this number. I have run it before and I'm quite pleased with this performance. And then I'm going to utilize the I multiplied with another magic number, as we say. And then I need to create a timing value. So I will create a counter that I'm going to set up to change here, right? So on every frame, it's going to just one step. This counter, I also need to declare it at my variables here. Base. This counter equals to 0. Yeah, and I need one more variable to declare that it's going to be the wave's speed. And the wave speed, let's say we will set this up to which value? Let's make it a random, like a slower value and a little bit faster, right? It's going to give us like some feeling of randomization that it's going to look quite interesting, a bit more interesting than the other thing. So we multiply the counter, the timing value with the wave speed, right? So this is going to generate a variation using the noise function, and it's going to keep the animation going by having this timing aspect. And the other thing I want to do is I will define the Y, and I will use a map function to take the noise function between 0 to 1 and represent it to 0 and height. I think my function now is ready. I already see these waves on my screen. You see here that there is a little gap, and in order to avoid this, I need to add a little offset. So this is gonna, like this segment, this part of the segment, it doesn't appear. And I added an offset, so now it works all the way across. So here we see that we have 3 different patterns because we generate for a different instance, we generate a different process, right? So anyway, this is like what I decided that I would like to have on my result, and it looks quite interesting. Now, the other part that I also need to add is that if we have, let's say, another city that it is having different conditions, perhaps we would like to utilize a different kind of colorization, of the wave. In some instances, this is quite fine, but if we want to add a little bit more to it, then we need to come here to the coloring process and make sure that the stroke, or actually this can go outside to optimize a little bit the speed, right? And we can define a specific stroke value, and we can follow the same process that we did here. And according to a specific description, like if the description that comes from our API is let's say it gives us an atmosphere as an indication, then the stroke of this will be such and such, right? So for each let's say here I make it fully white for the atmosphere, and if the description is clear, I make it let's say blue. Actually, I'll make it I'll make it completely white. And then if there is clouds, make it completely dark, just for the sake of the demonstration. Completely white, select city. Which one was the, yeah, completely black, right? So according to the different selection, we see that there is a different kind of response. I'm going to go ahead and put the color values that I have selected, and we're going to see the results afterwards. Okay, so these are the values that I found. Here I utilized the RGB because I also wanted to use different transparency values on some that I felt that the color was too intense. We have the same descriptions as before, and these that will be responsible for the stroke color of the lines. So now this is like a bit more delicate pinkish, and for a cloudy day we have a kind of a soft grayish with a little blue, I would say. So yeah, this is our wave function that enhances a little bit the visual aesthetics. And let's also see it on a full screen, right? It looks quite interesting. Now it seems to be a little slow, and we can adjust if we want to optimize. We can make the segments a little bit less, or the number of waves to be less as well, and this will optimize the performance. Usually for me, the settings, they run quite well. Now, perhaps with the Zoom and the recording is taking a little bit more resources from my computer. But it's not bad. I'm quite pleased with this result. And one last thing that we could add, this I would say it is optional, but it is something to think about, is that for each particular city, we could have a certain image of a city that represent that. For now, I'm going to just close these waves. And what I'm going to do is I will create a new function that I will say, this is going to be the set background function. So for this background, what I will come and say is that I want to have a different image appearing at the end, right? So if the location of a city, if this dot location, sorry, if this dot location equals to be Shanghai, this is the message we receive from the constructor, then let's say select this image, right? Select Shanghai image. Okay. Let's continue this for 4 cities: Athens, New York, and let's do London. Okay, so for each one, we're going to select something different. Right here, I don't need these comments, but yeah. Okay, great. Okay, so the way to do this is we need to have these images, and I have already included the images here on my folder, and I have made sure that this size is going to be exactly the same size as this one. I have cropped it to exact the same dimensions. And also I have tried to identify images that they have a very good image quality. So always make sure that you know what is the size that you want to use the image for, and also you know the dimensions and the aspect ratio. So this kind of aspect ratio that I use now, it is exactly the same as the one I have here. So I know I will not get a lot of distortion, image distortion, or perspective distortion. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back to my preload. On my preload, I'm going to do exactly the same. Let's say, maybe I will start with Shanghai, then I will go to Athens, then I go to New York and London. This is the same order that I have set the cities here. Although it's not important, but it's good to know where each one of these images are, so that I can keep track later on when I go to the selection bits, when I am in the class, and when I'm here. So here we need to have a this.bg image, a variable that it's going to be, we're going to assign each different image array, right? Let me complete this part first. So this one is going to load that image. This is going to load image number 1, 2, and 3. So going back to declare this here, I can declare already the first one, which is Shanghai, for initialization. And now after I load it, I need to display it, right? And I need to use an image function. Have I also included this on my draw? No. Okay. I can do it here. Weather objs i.setBG like this. And actually this should be here if I want to activate it afterwards. That is going to be the order of how I want to draw things. Getting back to this one. So yeah, this image is going to be the image I wanted to display, and I'm going to use the location, this.x and 0. This is, I want to be my starting points, and this is what we have at the moment. The image of Shanghai, and if I select a different city, it's going to give me a different city. Here, there seems to be a little bit of offset of my image. I can definitely resize it if I want. Okay, but you see, now this is responding to the cities that we want to have. And because this is a little bit too intense, maybe we want to fade it out a little bit. So I come here, I use the tint function. Tint is going to allow me to fade this out, and I will fade it something like, I don't know, 50 or 60. Let's do 60 out of 255, right? And then after I do this, I want to bring the tint back so it doesn't disturb any other elements, any other images, because I do have other images. Okay, so now it displays both kind of the color, because this is transparent and we can see what is behind that, which is the gradient. And this is what we get, right? It's a little bit more easy to read the interface, and it gives a kind of a nice feeling. So I think that's all the functions that I wanted to demonstrate to you. Certainly, if we want to have the waves in addition with all of the other things, then we can simply comment this like that. It's going to be a little bit slower because it's drawing quite a few things at the moment, but it is an option. Personally, I would go either with the image or with the gradients and so on. I think the gradient is a little nicer. I don't know, a little bit more simplistic, and it works quite well when we see different variations of color conditions across. Now the weather conditions, they are very similar, so it's quite like repeating, quite repetitive. Yeah, this is quite nice. I find is okay. All right, so this is the workshop. This is what I wanted to show to you. I hope that you find something useful here. You have seen the whole process, how we operate with data, bringing data into our system, creating a more dynamic, responsive environment, using different, let's say, functions, using classes, different instances that they draw things in a different way, different instances that they utilize different data to create these visualizations, and all of these additional things on how we can add a kind of a design and aesthetic choices for the fonts, for the background, for the gradients, for the images that we use, and so on. So that is the tutorial for today. Thanks a lot for watching, and take care. Bye.